A slave ship is cutting through the dark waters of the Atlantic, its sails billowing as it heads toward the shores of West Africa. On board, the atmosphere is tense. The white crew members, along with the captain and the slave trader who owns the vessel, have one grim purpose: to seize human lives. Anchored off a remote harbor, their mission is clear: invade small villages, capture as many people as possible, and turn them into slaves. Under the cover of night, they descend on unsuspecting communities, terrorizing families and ripping apart lives. With guns drawn and shackles ready, they begin their ruthless raid. Screams echo in the quiet night as they drag men, women, and even children from their homes. Resistance is futile. Many villagers try to fight, but the heavily armed crew quickly overpowers them. The captives are forced into long chains, their wrists and ankles bound tightly, and they are marched toward the waiting slave ship. Panic grips the prisoners. They have heard the whispered rumors of these white men from across the seas, stories told in fear and horror. But nothing could prepare them for the unimaginable fate awaiting them. Many don't understand what is happening. Why were they torn from their families? Why are they being herded like cattle onto these massive wooden ships? They have no idea that they are being sold into slavery, destined for the so-called New World, where they will live out their lives in brutal servitude. The captives, once free individuals living peaceful lives, are now thrust into a grueling journey toward the looming slave ship. As chains rattle around their wrists and ankles, the captives stagger forward, exhausted, confused, and terrified. They struggle to comprehend how their lives, filled with family, culture, and tradition, have suddenly collapsed into this nightmare. The ship, a massive structure dominating the horizon, looks like a menacing beast of the sea, its dark, towering decks waiting to consume them whole. With every step closer, the terror in their eyes grows. Many are unsure if they will ever return to their homes. Once at the ship, the captives are forcibly pushed up the gangway, each step heavy with despair. Their initial confusion gives way to a crushing realization: they are now prisoners of a brutal system. Chained tightly together, they are shoved into the dark, cramped belly of the ship, a place designed for torment. This floating prison has no mercy. As the captives descend into the ship's hold, they are met with a stifling darkness and air thick with the overwhelming stench of sweat, urine, and fear. The confined space is packed so tightly that they can barely move. Some collapse from the suffocating heat, but there is no relief. The floor is a wooden grate, slick with filth, and the captives have no choice but to sit in their own waste. Unable to stand, stretch, or even adjust their position, they are trapped in a twisted mass of humanity. This is just the beginning of what will be a brutal, unforgiving journey. The captives quickly realize that survival is uncertain, as disease, starvation, and physical exhaustion claim lives each day. Illnesses like dysentery, smallpox, and typhus spread rapidly in the confined quarters, with no clean water or medical care to treat the sick. The conditions are so severe that many do not survive the first days of the journey. Their bodies, considered worthless to the crew once dead, are unceremoniously thrown overboard. Lost to the depths of the ocean without a second thought. For the living, the constant threat of death becomes part of daily existence. The air is filled with the wails of those in pain, the weak cries of children, and the unsettling silence of those too broken to scream. The Middle Passage, a term that would come to symbolize one of the most inhumane chapters in history, was more than just a voyage across the Atlantic. It was a journey into the depths of human suffering. The length of the journey varied greatly. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the trip could last up to 6 months, as navigation was slow and treacherous. By the 18th and 19th centuries, advancements in navigation and ship design shortened the journey to a matter of weeks. But this increased efficiency came at a terrible cost. The shorter voyage meant that more captives could be transported at one time, leading to even more overcrowding and suffering below deck. The journey was a living nightmare in every sense. Food and water were scarce, and the crew rationed meager portions to the captives, barely enough to keep them alive. Starvation became a common cause of death, as the weak struggled to eat in the dark, nauseating hold. Thirst was a constant torment, with the limited water often contaminated. The rolling waves of the Atlantic added to the misery, making rest impossible as the ship rocked violently. Many captives suffered from seasickness, adding to the filth and stench below deck. For those who survived the harrowing journey, the arrival in the Americas offered little relief. They often stepped onto land broken in both body and spirit, having endured weeks or months of unimaginable suffering. For women aboard these ships, the horrors of the Middle Passage were even more profound. Separated from their families, women faced the additional threat of sexual violence from the crew. Exploiting the power dynamics aboard the ship, the crew members often targeted the most vulnerable, subjecting the women to abuse that left deep emotional scars. Such assaults went largely unpunished, as the crew prioritized the smooth running of the voyage over any sense of morality. The trauma of these experiences haunted many women for the rest of their lives, even as they were forced to continue living under brutal conditions in the New World. The mental and physical toll of the Middle Passage was devastating. The lack of basic sanitation, coupled with the inhumane treatment, broke the spirits of many captives. Those who survived the journey often arrived in the Americas weakened, malnourished, and scarred by the experience. Yet, even in the midst of this overwhelming suffering, there were glimmers of resistance and resilience. The captives found small ways to defy their captors, refusing to eat, singing songs of their homeland, or holding on to memories of their families. These acts of defiance, however small, were a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. The Middle Passage, driven by greed and fueled by cruelty, was one of the darkest chapters in the history of humanity. It was a systematic dehumanization that left millions scarred, not just physically but also culturally. The transatlantic slave trade, beginning in the 16th century, continued for over 3 centuries, affecting countless lives and leaving a lasting impact on African societies. It disrupted cultures, tore apart communities, and reshaped the world in ways that are still felt today. The legacy of the Middle Passage continues to echo through history, a painful reminder of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unthinkable adversity. While the captives endured unimaginable hardships, they also carried with them a deep will to survive, to resist, and to maintain their cultural identity. Even in the most oppressive conditions, they managed to preserve traditions, languages, and stories, passing them down to future generations. Their resilience became the foundation for later struggles for freedom, justice, and equality. Today, the descendants of those who endured the Middle Passage continue to honor their ancestors' legacy. They work to preserve the stories, songs, and traditions that survived the brutal journey across the Atlantic. As we reflect on this chapter of history, it is crucial to acknowledge the suffering that took place, while also recognizing the strength, resilience, and humanity of those who survived it. By understanding the past, we can work toward a more just and equitable future, ensuring that the lessons of history are not forgotten. If you believe that stories like these should be shared and remembered, please consider supporting us by subscribing to our channel. Click the bell icon to stay updated on our latest videos exploring untold stories of history. Share your thoughts in the comments below, as meaningful discussions help spread awareness about the lessons of the past. Together, we can honor history and work toward a world of greater understanding, justice, and equality. But the horrors of the slave trade did not end with the journey. Upon arrival in the New World, the captives were sold at auction like livestock. Families were torn apart, with husbands, wives, and children often sold to different owners, never to see each other again. The enslaved Africans were stripped of their identities, given new names, and forced to work under brutal conditions on plantations, mines, and farms. Their labor built the wealth of nations, but their humanity was denied at every turn. The Atlantic slave trade, which began in 1526 when the Portuguese brought African slaves to colonial Brazil, soon spread to other European powers. Spain, Britain, France, Denmark, and the Netherlands all joined in, eager to profit from this monstrous system. Over the course of 3 centuries, an estimated 12 million Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas. They were not just victims of violence and exploitation. They were survivors of one of the darkest chapters in human history. Their strength, resilience, and ability to endure such immense suffering are a testament to the human spirit. Even in the face of unimaginable cruelty, this horrific trade in human lives did not go unchallenged. Over time, abolitionists, both black and white, began to fight against the slave trade. Olaudah Equiano, a former slave who became a prominent abolitionist, detailed his experiences on a slave ship in his autobiography. He described the terror he felt when he was first captured and the unimaginable cruelty he witnessed aboard the ship. His testimony, along with the efforts of other abolitionists, played a significant role in raising awareness of the inhumanity of the slave trade. By the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the movement to abolish slavery gained momentum. Countries like Britain and the United States eventually passed laws banning the transatlantic slave trade. But the scars left by this brutal system remained. The legacy of slavery continues to impact the descendants of those who were enslaved, shaping the social, political, and economic landscapes of the Americas. Despite the end of the transatlantic slave trade, the struggle for freedom and equality for black people continued. Enslaved Africans fought for their rights in the New World, leading rebellions and resisting their oppressors in every way they could. From the Maroons of Jamaica to the Haitian Revolution, enslaved Africans refused to accept their fate and fought fiercely for their freedom. The story of the Atlantic slave trade is a reminder of the cruelty that human beings are capable of, but it is also a story of resilience, strength, and the unbreakable human spirit. The enslaved Africans endured unimaginable suffering, but they never lost their humanity. Their legacy lives on in the descendants who continue to fight for justice and equality in a world still grappling with the aftermath of slavery. A large ship, manned by white crew members and captained by a ruthless leader, sails toward the western coast of Africa. The ship's purpose is singular and clear: to capture men, women, and children for the transatlantic slave trade. The vessel, designed specifically to transport human cargo, has arrived at the shore. As the ship anchors, the crew prepares to storm the nearby villages. They know the mission ahead: capturing as many individuals as possible, tearing them from their homes, and shackling them for a journey across the Atlantic. The raid is sudden and brutal. The crew charges into small, unsuspecting villages, armed and aggressive. Families try to flee, but many are captured in the chaos. The crew forcibly chains men, women, and children together, disregarding their pleas for mercy. It is a scene of desperation and fear, as loved ones are torn apart, never to see each other again. The captives are pushed forward, dragged toward the ship. These people, who just hours earlier were living in freedom, are now reduced to being human cargo. The enslaved individuals, terrified and confused, try to understand what is happening. For many, this is their first encounter with Europeans, and they have no knowledge of what awaits them. Their minds are filled with questions. Why have they been taken, and where are they being taken? The captives have heard rumors of distant lands and terrible fates, but the reality of the slave ship is far worse than anything they could have imagined. As they reach the ship, the captives are forced to board, still chained together. They are pushed into the dark, damp hold of the ship, where they are packed tightly. The space is so cramped that there is barely enough room to move. The air is thick, filled with the stench of sweat, blood, and human waste. The darkness is suffocating, and the enslaved are left to sit in their own filth. The ship's crew sees them as mere cargo, valuable only for the profit they will bring upon arrival in the New World. The journey across the Atlantic, known as the Middle Passage begins. This journey is infamous for its brutal conditions and inhumane treatment. The enslaved individuals are given minimal food and water, barely enough to sustain life. They are chained together, unable to move freely, and are forced to relieve themselves where they sit. Disease spreads rapidly in the unsanitary conditions, and many captives succumb to illness before reaching their destination. The dead are often left among the living for hours or even days before being thrown overboard. The ship's crew, focused solely on profit, enforces strict control over the captives. Any sign of resistance is met with harsh punishment. The crew uses whips, shackles, and other forms of torture to maintain order. The enslaved are forced to eat, even when they have no appetite, as the crew is determined to keep them alive for sale in the New World. Starvation and dehydration weaken the captives, making survival even more challenging. Despite the overwhelming odds, some captives find ways to resist. They whisper words of hope to one another, sing songs from their homeland, and hold on to memories of their past lives. These small acts of solidarity offer a glimmer of hope, a reminder that they are not alone in their suffering. However, resistance is dangerous. The crew is quick to retaliate, using brutal force to crush any defiance. The captives must endure this relentless cycle of violence and fear for weeks, sometimes months, as the ship makes its way across the ocean. The vast ship, heaving on the waves of the Atlantic, pushes forward with a grim determination. It's no ordinary vessel. It's a slave ship, its decks burdened with a human cargo captured from the coasts of West Africa. Among the enslaved, women endure distinct hardships. The women, like the men and children below deck, are confined to the ship's dark, foul hold. But they face additional challenges unique to their vulnerability. The journey is already a harrowing test of endurance. Intense heat, scarce food, and insufficient water test their physical limits. Yet, beyond the physical torment, there is an ever-present, underlying fear of the crew's abuse of power. The women often find themselves at greater risk, becoming targets for exploitation by crew members seeking to assert dominance. These attacks add layers of emotional trauma to an already unbearable ordeal, making each day a matter of survival not only of body but also of spirit. Despite the relentless cruelty, a quiet yet profound resilience emerges among the women. Though many feel broken, they discover ways to find solidarity among one another. They offer whispered words of comfort, shared prayers, and an occasional song, small but significant acts that kindle a sense of humanity and unity even in such desolate conditions. For these women, maintaining a sense of dignity amidst dehumanization becomes a silent rebellion, a means of preserving the core of who they are despite the dehumanizing circumstances surrounding them. The ship's journey is arduous, taking several weeks or even months depending on the conditions at sea. Progress is slow, and the captives suffer the brunt of this prolonged torture. The cramped quarters make movement almost impossible, and the lack of fresh air adds to the suffocating misery. Each breath below deck is a struggle as the air becomes filled with the sickening stench of unwashed bodies, disease, and death. Illness is rampant, with diseases like dysentery and smallpox spreading rapidly among the captives. With no access to medical care, the sick are left to their fate. Those who perish are unceremoniously thrown overboard, a grim act that underscores the crew's disregard for the humanity of the captives. The Middle Passage is not merely a journey of distance. It is a journey of identity, loss, and forced transformation. Upon arriving in the New World, the captives face another layer of dehumanization. Stripped of their names, cultures, and languages, they are given new, often arbitrary names by their captors. They are sold at auctions, treated as mere commodities rather than as human beings. The auctions are heartbreaking spectacles, where family ties are severed without hesitation, parents separated from children, siblings pulled apart, and spouses sold to different owners. It is a systematic effort to break the spirits of the enslaved, to deny them even the most basic elements of personal identity and connection to their origins. Once sold, the captives are transported to plantations, mines, and labor sites, where the conditions are equally brutal. They are forced to work long hours under the scorching sun, with little food or rest. The grueling labor is compounded by the constant threat of violence, as overseers and slave owners impose harsh punishments to maintain control. Yet, even in these extreme conditions, the enslaved manage to find ways to resist and to assert their humanity. They sing spirituals, tell stories of their homelands, and teach their children the traditions and languages of their ancestors. These acts of cultural preservation are not just about survival. They are a powerful declaration of resilience and defiance in the face of oppression. The transatlantic slave trade, which began in the early 16th century, was driven by European nations seeking wealth and resources from their colonies in the Americas. Portugal, Spain, Britain, France, and the Netherlands were all major players in this inhumane trade, motivated by the immense profits it generated. Over the course of more than 3 centuries, millions of Africans were forcibly taken from their homes, stripped of their identities, and transported across the Atlantic under brutal conditions. The impact of the trade was devastating not only to the individuals captured but also to African societies as a whole. Cultures were disrupted, economies were altered, and communities were forever changed. The legacy of the transatlantic slave trade is still deeply felt today. Descendants of the enslaved continue to grapple with the long-term effects of systemic racism, economic disparity, and social inequality. However, the story of the trade is not solely one of suffering, it is also one of remarkable resilience. The enslaved endured unimaginable hardships, but they never lost their will to live or their desire for freedom. Their strength and determination in the face of adversity serve as a powerful testament to the enduring human spirit. The descendants of those who were enslaved continue to honor their legacy, preserving the stories, songs, and traditions passed down through generations. These cultural elements have become symbols of pride and identity, serving as a means of connection to the past. The acts of resistance and cultural preservation were not only a means of survival but also a powerful assertion of humanity. The legacy of these acts continues to inspire movements for justice, equality, and human rights in the modern world. As we reflect on the transatlantic slave trade, it is crucial to acknowledge the suffering endured by millions of Africans who were forcibly taken from their homes and subjected to unimaginable cruelty. However, it is equally important to recognize their strength, resilience, and enduring impact on the world. By understanding this dark chapter of history, we can work toward a more just and equitable future. One that honors the memory of those who endured the horrors of the Middle Passage and the generations that followed. If you believe that stories like these should be remembered and shared, please consider supporting our efforts by subscribing to our channel. By clicking the bell icon, you can stay updated on our latest videos exploring untold stories of history. We encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below, as meaningful conversations help us spread awareness about the lessons history has to offer. Together, we can work toward a future of understanding, justice, and equality, guided by the lessons of the past.